Hey guys, Dylan from Geek Duo here, and today I'll be bringing you another RWBY discussion video. This one revolving around my attempts to understand and explain the growing multiverse that we've seen arise in RWBY in the past few years. Now, literally a couple hours ago, Kerry and Barbara appeared at Anime Expo and said that RWBY has a new home with Viz Media. So I figured I should probably get back into actually focusing on these videos that I've had scripted and just sitting there for ages. I know it seems that every franchise thinks that it needs to have a multiverse nowadays, and honestly, some of them aren't even really multiverses, though they claim to be, in order to stay relevant, to the point that a lot of people are feeling multiverse fatigue. But RWBY has technically been setting up their multiverse since just after the MCU started exploring other dimensions, let alone universes, way back in 2015. I'll start by explaining some of the terms that I'll be using throughout this video for anyone who has somehow managed to avoid any exposure to multiverses, and for anyone who just doesn't really understand the terms that people use, and then go on to showcase each distinctly separate RWBY universe that we know of so far. Oh, and spoilers for everything RWBY related except for RWBY Beyond, because I still haven't been able to watch that since the Rooster Teeth site shut down, because it shut down on the exact day that I got home from my international holiday, which I left for before RWBY Beyond started. So I have seen nothing about that and therefore can't talk about anything on that. There are a number of different terms to explore when it comes to a multiverse, and they usually come in an agreed upon hierarchy of size, and I'll be going through the list from smallest to largest. Usually the smallest thing is a world. Should be self-explanatory. A world is basically interchangeable with a planet, and I hope I don't need to explain what a planet is. More often than not, it's likely referring to an inhabited planet. Example, Earth, Remnant, the Ever After, places like that. The next size up is universes, and this is a collection of worlds or planets that can be traveled through physical space. Most works of fiction usually only have one known world in its universe, while others can have more planets than we know of existing in our universe in reality. So this is a very broad range that it could be referring to. After universes comes multiverses. While the concept of a multiverse is becoming more widespread in common media nowadays, there are still many people who don't know what it is, and a multiverse is a collection of universes. They can be different versions of the same universe, so like two different forms of Earth, or completely different universes, like Earth and Remnant, that can be connected through mystical or other unnatural means of travel, but not traversable through physical space. And as you can probably see already, each tier up is just a collection of the tier below it. Finally, we have the concept of an omniverse, which is a very niche term that you don't see spoken about very often, and that is a collection of multiverses. It is purely set in place so that you can have different versions of the same characters that can interact with other universes, while also stopping them from interacting with specific universes. Now that the terms of this video have been explained, it's time to relate them back to the topic of this video, that being RWBY. And this time it's probably going to be easiest to go from largest to smallest. Starting with Omniverse, and this was only brought in as a way for me to separate this opening part into three distinct unconnected multiverses in order to make this theory more easily understood. So let's call this the Warner Brothers Omniverse. For those of you that want a better answer as to why I'm going this far to make things separate, I'm purely doing it so I don't have to touch upon this image. It's linked below if you want a higher definition version. This image is basically an incomplete interconnectivity tree of basically everything pop culture. But there are a lot of links and other medias that are still not shown on this. Moving inside the Omniverse, and as I said, there are 4 different multiverses that I'll be making reference to, though we'll only be exploring 3 of them, and one is just very brief. The first and largest is the DC multiverse. I think it's still in its DC Rebirth version, but they may have rebooted again since I last really looked at it. I honestly don't know. And this is the one that we will not be delving any further into, as it has already been established as a thing that exists for a long time. It is way too big for this video, and because there's actually nothing RWBY related inside of it, and therefore isn't even important for this video. In fact, the only reason it's important enough to even mention is so that it can be shown as separate from the second multiverse, that being the RWBY multiverse. This is the multiverse that contains all of the universes related to the multiple crossovers that have happened between the RWBY universe and the DC universe, that being the DC RWBY comics and the superhero and Huntsman movies. We will be diving deeper into this one. There is also a secondary crossover multiverse, this being the RWBY x Justice League comic, which directly state that there is a multiverse in it, but it is unclear as to whether it can be considered the same multiverse as the other crossovers. We also know next to nothing about this multiverse, which is why I say we will only be briefly touching upon it in the future segment. And the final multiverse is the most important in this video, and that is the actual RWBY multiverse, which contains every other version of RWBY that doesn't cross over with any DC ones. We will obviously be diving into this one at a later point. Moving inside the RWBY multiverse, and obviously there is a RWBY universe and the DC universe in there. Simple, right? Wrong. Because there's actually 2 versions of each of these universes in there. We know this because there are certain inconsistencies between the 2 crossovers, that being the comics one, which is this top one, and the movie one, which is this bottom one, that make it impossible for them to be the same universe, such as different characters being different species when crossing universes, Blake not being a faunus in the movie, but she is in the comics. There's also the fact that both versions of this story tell of the first meeting between these characters, each of them having different main villains, different rules regarding semblances, while in the DC universe, either having the same one or having altered ones, as well as in the comics, DC characters were able to unlock semblances. So all of this basically breaks down to there being a movie version of RWBY, a comics version of RWBY, a movie version of DC, and a comics version of DC. Could I have broken these into 2 different multiverses again? Because there's no way that each of these will actually interact with each other, or the ones on the diagonal will? Yes. But for the sake of conciseness, I've just grouped them all together. However, these have been separated from the other multiverses for that exact reason, in that so that RWBY as a show can't actually interact with any of these. And also so that the main DC multiverse can't interact with RWBY. And because of timeline reasons, since the main universe is canon to the movie timeline, but the movies don't happen in the show timeline. I don't know about the comics, how that works, because I still haven't read them. So yeah, there's a variety of reasons as to why I've just separated these for basically simplicity's sake. Moving on to the RWBY x Justice League comics, and the only known universe in this is the RWBY universe. However, the Justice League do decide to leave Remnant to become heroes of the multiverse. So it is explicitly stated that there is a multiverse in relation to this story, because even the Guardian that gives Jessica her powers is a multiversal entity. So it obviously exists in there. We just know absolutely nothing about it. Jumping over to the RWBY multiverse now, and as I said earlier, this is just a collection of all the other versions of the RWBY universe, which also have no likelihood of crossing over. So, like the previous section, I've just decided to group them together for conciseness. Anyway, the most obvious version that appears in here is the main RWBY universe. That being the show, the E.C. Meyer books, Grim Eclipse, Arrowfell, Grim Campaign, arguably the Fairy Tales of Remnant, the show and book, RWBY Beyond, any character information given in Amity Arena, like Sienna's Semblance, and the comics made by DC, not to be confused with the DC crossover comics. These were RWBY specific comics. The show tells us the main story. The books fill us in on what other characters were doing off screen at different points of the story. The DC characters fill us in on some unseen adventures of the main cast. They're set between volumes 3 and 4. Grim Eclipse and Arrowfell act the same as the comics, except one is set during Beacon Time, one is set during volume 8, I think it is. Amity Arena is purely there for lore, and Grim Campaign has been confirmed to happen in the main canon, but does not interact with the main story. The next clear version of the RWBY universe is Ice Queendom, which is officially classified as canon adjacent, meaning it follows the canon but isn't canon itself. Basically, divergent timelines where events that happen in one cause it to go on a completely different path to the other. In this case, it's the fact that there was a nightmare in the Emerald Forest during initiation, which led to the events of Ice Queendom. Though there are other inconsistencies prior to the nightmare affecting the story. Finally, I will be classifying all of the not non-canon or canon until it's not stories as separate universes. This basically means that the events and world building that happen in these can be taken as having happened within the main universe, unless there is something that contradicts it in the main universe. I'll also be adding definitively non-canon forms of media, moving another layer deeper now, and there are only 2 worlds shown within the RWBY multiverse, these being Remnant and the Ever After. Though there is dialogue that says that the brother gods left Remnant to create other worlds, so there may be more that we just haven't seen. There is actually only one version of Remnant that we know for certain exists alongside the Ever After, which is the main universe. So that's the only one that we can actually create a link between Remnant and the Ever After. However, it was beings from the Ever After that were responsible for the creation of Remnant. These other versions of Remnant can't really exist without also having their own version of the Ever After. So I'm just going to put potential links between all of them and their own version of the Ever After. Similarly, there are only 2 worlds shown within the JLX RWBY multiverse, that being Earth and Remnant. However, just like before, this multiverse isn't as simple as it seems. See, there's a reason I mentioned that the fact that the show is canon to the movies, and that is because the second movie is set after Volume 9, which means that the Ever After is canon to the movies. They even allude to it with a throwaway line about Team RWBY having experienced time dilation. So we know for certain that the events of this happened. Yes, this would also mean that the comments about the gods having left Remnant to go build other worlds are also canon, but since we don't know whether they did actually go on to create others, or how many there are if they did, we're just going to gloss over that like we did with the RWBY universe. There's also the fact that we don't actually know whether or not the Ever After exists in the comic universe, but since, as I said, beings from the Ever After created Remnant, I'm going to put a potential link. So now we've got at least 3 definitive worlds, and that is already more than a lot of people realize are a part of this. Now it's time to look closer at the DC side of things. I will only be touching upon worlds that can 100% be confirmed by what is shown in each version of the universe. Both versions of the Justice League are shown to have a Superman and a Green Lantern, meaning they both must have a Krypton and a Noah. The comics version has Sinestro on one of its covers, meaning it must have a Korrigan within that universe, which is the only other known world. The movie version has a couple more, with the mention of Brainiac, meaning Kolu must exist, and Kilgore also comes from somewhere off Earth, though all I could find about his home planet is that it was in the Pleiades sector. We don't actually have a name for the planet. There's also another couple dimensions that could exist depending on which of the members of the Team Titans, but since we only got the team name, we can't confirm anything. And by dimensions, I mean other realms or other planets. I'm just looping them together. I realized I didn't actually define what dimensions were because I took that part of this out. Finally, as with the others, we don't know much about the RWBY X Justice League one, just that it has a remnant and whichever world it says Starro is from. It just says off planet. It doesn't say where the world is. I will admit there's also the possibility that there's an Ever After and the likelihood of there being other planets because there has a multiverse, but those are the only 2 known worlds because we don't actually know what one of the worlds are. So there you have it. That is every world, universe and multiverse that is related to RWBY, whether they be directly linked or tangentially through a crossover with the DC Earth. Note how I had to specify that it was the crossover Earths, because remember, if it was just the DC Earths, I would have to talk about this and everything that this misses. And all of this is possible because either Shiro Mira or someone from Rooster Teeth reached out to the other and organized for RWBY to be serialized as a manga in Ultra Jump way back in 2015, placing it as the first piece that made RWBY into a multiverse. This would eventually be joined by RWBY Chibi in 2016, the official manga anthology in 2017, RWBY Combat Ready and the official manga in 2018, the RWBY deck building game, RWBY Crystal Match, which connects to RWBY Chibi, though it's unknown if it's in the same universe or not, and the Billy Billy game in 2019, RWBY X Justice League comics in 2021, RWBY Ice Queendom in 2022, and finally the DC RWBY comics and the 2 crossover movies in 2023. But I hope that clears everything up about the RWBY multiverse for all of you, and with that being said, I'll catch you in the next one.